University of Michigan housing officials have trained their student staff that they are not allowed to remove speech from whiteboards outside of residence halls' rooms, even if the speech is hateful or targeting a minority group. This is not a new rule for Michigan, but housing is reminding their student staff of the policy so they can avoid unintentional muting of protected speech. Students who live on campus have a right to say what they want on their doors and inside rooms, and by allowing students to have whiteboards on the outside of their doors in the hallway, they are creating a public forum where they cannot regulate speech. University Housing at Michigan has defended the longstanding policy, stating there is no way to define that hate speech. They continued by saying that stomping out such speech does nothing to reform the culture in which the speech occurs. We protect speech by fundamentally making it our policy that we do not suppress speech. So, if housing staff come across speech that someone finds offensive, or if the staff finds egregious in some way, they have chosen to respond to the speech rather than eliminate it. As a matter of fact, they specifically train their student staff members on how to communicate with both students who feel victimized and those promoting hate speech publicly. A distinguished law professor at Columbia, Eugene Volokh, feels that for the most part, housing at U of M is getting it right. The institution could step in and stop violent threats, but it's murky at best. Racial slurs or other sorts of epithets are protected speech if they do not target a specific person. Leisha Brooks, an outreach director at the Southern Poverty Law Center, feels that U of M's approach unnecessarily burdens student staff members. She also feels that there is room for interpretation and exceptions to the First Amendment. If a racial slur about black students was written on a whiteboard and there are only two black students on that hall, they could feel targeted. Kevin Kruger, the president of NASPA, feels that Michigan's policy is a good example of how First Amendment issues are treated on campus. Kruger stated that it's difficult to allow forms of hate speech knowing that very speech is creating a hostile and harmful environment for many of the marginalized communities on campus. Creating the space for all speech to occur, even hate speech, and developing a clear protocol by which the tenor of the speech can be examined while providing support for the students and communities most affected is the right move for the University of Michigan. Time and again, the protection of all speech, including speech identified as hate speech, has remained constant. Brandenburg versus Ohio in 1969, a KKK leader made inflammatory and bigoted public comments at a rally. The Supreme Court held that the government cannot punish inflammatory speech unless it's directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action. RAV versus City of St. Paul 92, the Supreme Court unanimously reversed the conviction of a teenager for burning a cross on someone's lawn and struck down St. Paul's bias motivated crime ordinance because the ordinance violated the teenager's First Amendment rights. At the University of Michigan in '89, Doe versus University of Michigan determined that the university's hate speech law violated the constitutional right to free speech. In the 18 months the code existed, there were over 20 cases in which white students charged black students with offensive speech. In Gilman versus Holmes County School District in 2008, high school students' First Amendment rights were upheld to express pro-gay messages on their clothing in a public school. The school's principal suspended Gilman and classmates for wearing pro-gay clothing, stating the messages were divisive and inappropriate for impressionable students. These are just a few examples of the First Amendment being challenged and winning in time and again. Organizations such as the American Civil Liberties Union, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, and the Speech First feel that free and open discourse is paramount in comprehensive education. They stand up for people whose rights have been taken away, and in some cases that means defending speech that deeply offends morality. In most cases, they feel that most speech, not less, is the answer consistent with the Constitution. Some feel that university housing dusting off these policies is a direct result of the recent litigation that University of Michigan has faced. Speech First sued Michigan and denounced that they end their bias response team, which investigates incidents of hate speech on campus. The judge presiding over the case indicated that the Speech First argument didn't have much merit. Speech First also took issue with the university's definitions for bullying and harassment, saying that the definitions were overly broad and posed a threat to the First Amendment. U of M did end up altering its definitions of bullying and harassment. My institution has discussed the very issue of public displays and took a different approach. They no longer provide whiteboards in the hallways, and they've also removed bulletin boards aside from designated posted areas. All signs hung on the posting areas must be approved by student affairs and university housing before they can even be displayed. And students are not allowed to display flags, posters, or any posted items in their windows facing outside, in common areas of their apartment without all roommate consent, or on their doors. This includes any offensive materials as well as university logos and the American flag. There are not really any incidents that offend involving posting in the residence halls, but the environments have become much more sterile. The feel you get walking through a healthy community is not present. Much of this could stem from today's student being less inclined to spend time in shared spaces, but part of me wonders if the community is left because we are not doing a good enough job to learn how to grow as a community. Avoiding discomfort feels safer, but is it really? One more thing should be mentioned about the policy at the University of Michigan. They do not censor speech, but they also do not censor students for removing a posting or erasing speech from a whiteboard. In a healthy and established community, the community holds itself accountable. Bigoted thoughts and ideas exist in these spaces, and the best way to dispel them is collectively.